Nexus Station hummed with life. Thousands of voices blended together in dozens of languages, creating a constant noise that never truly stopped. The air smelled like a mixture of exotic spices, engine fuel, and something metallic that Lyra could never quite identify. Ships arrived and departed every few minutes, their engines rumbling through the station's metal floors. In the lower market sector, where the cheapest vendors set up their stalls and the lighting flickered more than it should, a young Velari girl sat against a cold metal wall. Her name was Lyra, though no one had asked her name in weeks. No one asked the names of ghosts, and that's what she had become. Invisible. Forgotten. She pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and watched the crowds move past. Crothians with their thick gray skin and powerful builds pushed through smaller species without apology. The insect-like Zenthari clicked and chirped at each other while examining technological goods. Hupari merchants called out their prices in sing-song voices, trying to attract customers. Everywhere Lyra looked, she saw aliens eating, laughing, doing business, living their lives. She used to be one of them. 3 months ago, her family ran a small trading business. Nothing fancy, but they got by. Her mother would take her to the upper levels where the nicest restaurants served food from 100 different worlds. Her father would let her help count inventory in their small shop. Life wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Then the Galactic Commerce Council made their decision. The Velari had disagreed with the council over shipping rights in their home system. It wasn't even a big dispute, just a matter of trade percentages and route access. But the council didn't like being questioned. They didn't like species who stood up for themselves, especially smaller species without military power to back up their words. The blacklist came down fast. Within a week, every Velari account in the galactic banking system was frozen. Every Velari ship was impounded. Every business contract was voided. The message was simple and brutal: cooperate or starve. Lyra's parents had tried to fight it through legal channels. They hired a lawyer, filed appeals, attended hearings. But legal processes cost money, and their money was frozen. Eventually, they ran out of options. Her father had managed to get them passage on a transport ship heading back to their homeworld, but there was only room for 2 passengers. They had left Lyra on Nexus Station with enough currency for a week, promising to send for her as soon as they could arrange it. That was 3 weeks ago. She hadn't heard from them since. Communication cost money too. Her stomach cramped again, a sharp pain that made her wince. 3 days without food now. She had tried to make her small amount of currency last, but prices on Nexus Station were never cheap. Yesterday, she had spent the last of it on a small protein bar that had barely dulled the hunger. Lyra stood up slowly, her legs shaky beneath her. The iridescent patterns on her skin, normally bright and shimmering, had dulled to a sickly gray. She knew what that meant. Her body was starting to shut down. Velari could survive longer than humans without food, but not by much. Maybe another week, if she was lucky. Less if she kept pushing herself to walk around. But she had to try. She had to ask. Maybe someone would show mercy. She approached a food stall where a Crothian merchant was serving roasted meat to a line of customers. The smell made her dizzy with hunger. She waited until the line cleared, then stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Her voice cracked from disuse. I can work. I can clean your stall, or carry supplies, or anything you need. Just, please. I just need something to eat." The Crothian merchant looked down at her. His eyes were cold. "You're Velari." It wasn't a question. Her skin patterns gave her away immediately. "Yes, but I can work hard. I promise I won't cause any." "No service for your kind," the merchant said flatly. Then he laughed, a harsh barking sound. He picked up a piece of fruit from his refuse bin, something that had gone soft and rotten, and tossed it near her feet. It hit the metal floor with a wet splat. "There's your meal, blacklisted scum." His customers, 3 well-fed Crothians waiting for their orders, joined in the laughter. One of them made a comment in their own language, and the others laughed even harder. Lyra felt her face burn with shame. She backed away from the stall, stumbling slightly. The laughter followed her as she retreated to her corner, that same spot against the cold wall where she had spent most of the last week. She slid down to sit on the floor, pulling her knees up to her chest. Around her, the market continued its busy chaos. Vendors shouted. Customers haggled. Ships rumbled overhead. Life went on for everyone else. But not for her. The station's message was clear, written in every turned back and every refused transaction. The weak deserved nothing. The blacklisted deserved less than nothing. She was an inconvenience, a reminder of what happened when you went against the council's wishes. Lyra closed her eyes and tried not to think about food. She tried not to think about her parents, or whether they were even still alive. She tried not to think about how many days she had left before her body simply gave up. She just sat there, forgotten by the galaxy, waiting for an ending she couldn't prevent. Jake Mitchell's ship, the Wanderer, wasn't much to look at. Small cargo hauler, older model, with engine panels that rattled when he pushed the throttle too hard. But it was his, paid off in full after 5 years of running independent cargo across the outer sectors. He knew Nexus Station like the back of his hand by now. Every shortcut through the maintenance corridors, every vendor who gave fair prices, every dock officer who could be convinced to expedite paperwork for a bottle of Earth whiskey. This was supposed to be a quick stop. Refuel, pick up some medical supplies heading to the colony on Epsilon Ridge, maybe grab some decent food that wasn't reconstituted protein paste. In and out in 6 hours, 8 maximum. Jake walked through the lower market with his supply list pulled up on his datapad, mentally calculating costs. The Hupari vendor had the best prices on fuel cells. The Zen3 charged too much, but their equipment never failed. He was debating whether to splurge on the good stuff when he noticed something odd. The crowd ahead of him was flowing around something like water around a rock. Not just avoiding it, but actively pretending it didn't exist. Jake had seen that behavior before on dozens of stations. Usually meant trouble. A drunk who'd passed out, or a junkie having a bad reaction, or sometimes a body that nobody wanted to report because reporting meant paperwork and delays. But as he got closer, he saw it wasn't any of those things. It was a girl. Young, maybe 17 or 18 in Earth years, though Jake had learned that guessing ages across species was basically impossible. She was collapsed against the wall, her body curled up small. Her skin had patterns on it that shimmered weakly, some kind of iridescent quality that reminded Jake of oil on water. Velari, if he remembered correctly. He'd met a few Velari traders over the years. Nice folks, generally. Quiet, kept to themselves, but fair in their dealings. This girl looked like she was dying. Her skin was the wrong color, too gray, too dull. Her breathing was shallow. And the crowd just kept walking past her like she wasn't even there. A Crothian actually stepped over her outstretched leg without breaking stride. Jake stopped walking. He stood there for a moment, watching aliens pass by this dying kid like she was a piece of trash. Something cold settled in his chest. He'd seen a lot of ugly things in 5 years of trading in the outer sectors, but this casual cruelty still got to him. He put his datapad in his pocket and walked over to her. Up close, she looked even worse. How long had she been without food? Days? A week? Her clothes were dirty and torn in places. There was a bruise on her cheek that looked a few days old. Jake knelt down beside her. Hey, can you hear me? Her eyes opened slightly. They were an odd amber color, pretty even though they were clouded with exhaustion and fear. She looked at him like she couldn't quite process what she was seeing. Then the fear took over. She tried to push herself further back against the wall, away from him. It's okay, Jake said, keeping his voice soft. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm human. Jake Mitchell. What's your name? She didn't answer. Just stared at him with those frightened eyes. Jake could see her trying to figure out his angle. What did he want? Was this some kind of trap? He'd seen that look before, on refugees and survivors, on people who'd learned the hard way that kindness usually came with a price tag. You look like you could use some help, Jake continued. When's the last time you ate? Her lips moved but no sound came out at first. Then, barely a whisper, 3 days. 3 days. Christ. Jake felt that cold feeling in his chest turn into something hotter. Anger, maybe. Or disgust at the alien still walking past without a glance. Come on, Jake said gently, offering his hand. Let's get you some food. She didn't move. Didn't take his hand. Just looked at it like it might bite her. Why would a stranger help her? The question was written all over her face. Nobody helped the blacklisted. Nobody risked council attention for a Velari. Nobody cared. Jake kept his hand extended. He didn't push. Didn't try to pull her up or rush her. Just waited, patient, letting her make the choice. Look, he said after a moment. I don't know what happened to you, and you don't have to tell me. But I do know that nobody should starve. Not here, not anywhere. I'm going to go get some food. You can come with me, or you can stay here. Your choice. But I'm not leaving until I know you've eaten something. She studied his face. Jake didn't know what she was looking for, but he kept his expression open, honest. He'd been told he had one of those faces that people trusted. Too honest for his own good, his ex-girlfriend used to say. too willing to believe the best in people. Finally, slowly, Lyra reached out and took his hand. Her grip was weak, barely there, but it was something. Jake helped her to her feet, supporting most of her weight when her legs nearly gave out. "Easy," he said. "Take it slow. There's a food stall about 50 meters that way. Think you can make it?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. As they walked, Jake noticed the stares. Aliens watching this human helping a Velari. Some looked curious. Others looked disgusted. A few looked angry. Jake ignored them all. He kept his focus on getting this kid to food, one step at a time. He didn't know it yet, but that simple decision, that choice to stop and help when everyone else walked by, was about to change everything. That first meal at the Hupari food stall changed something in Jake. He couldn't just walk away. The next morning, instead of leaving Nexus Station like he'd planned, he found himself heading back to the lower market with a bag of hot breakfast. Lyra was in the same spot, looking surprised when she saw him approaching. "Thought you might be hungry," Jake said, sitting down next to her and handing over the food. She took it with trembling hands, still not quite believing this was real. "Why are you doing this?" Jake shrugged. "Because I can. Because it's the right thing to do." He came back the next day. And the day after that. Each time with food, sometimes with water and medical supplies. Lyra started looking healthier. The gray tint to her skin faded. Her eyes became clearer. She started talking more, telling him about her family, about what happened to the Velari, about her parents who she hadn't heard from in weeks. By the third day, other vendors in the market had noticed. Jake could feel their eyes on him whenever he showed up. Whispers followed him through the crowds. The human who feeds the blacklisted girl. The human who doesn't follow council law. The human who thinks is better than everyone else. Jake didn't care what they thought. But he knew this couldn't continue forever. Lyra needed more than charity. She needed stability, legal protection, a way to survive on her own. On the 5th day, he made her an offer. "How would you like a job?" Lyra looked up from her meal, confused. "A job? On my ship. I need help organizing cargo, maintaining inventory, basic stuff. It's legitimate employment. Pays standard rates. And it means you'd have legal worker status on the station. They can't touch you if you're employed by a registered human vessel. You would do that for me?" Her voice cracked with emotion. "I'm not doing you a favor," Jake said, though they both knew he was. "I actually do need the help. Running cargo solo is exhausting. So, you interested?" She nodded, unable to speak through the tears. Word spread fast after that. A human wasn't just feeding a Velari, he'd actually hired one. Given her legal status. Openly defied the council's blacklist. Within 2 days, the story had traveled through the entire station. Within 4 days, it had reached other stations in the sector. Within a week, the Galactic Commerce Council had heard about it. The summons came on a Tuesday morning. An official council courier delivered it directly to Jake's ship. Formal document, fancy letterhead, lots of legal language that basically boiled down to, report to council chambers immediately or face arrest. Jake read it twice, then looked at Lyra who was sorting through spare parts in the cargo bay. "Looks like I've got a meeting." She saw the document in his hand and went pale. "The council." "Don't worry. I knew this was coming." But Lyra was worried. Everyone knew what happened when the council summoned you. They didn't ask nicely. They didn't negotiate. They told you how things were going to be, and you either obeyed or suffered the consequences. The council chambers were on the upper levels of Nexus Station, where the lighting was better and the air didn't smell like fuel and old food. 3 council members sat behind an elevated desk, looking down at Jake like judges at a trial. A Crothian, a Zenthari, and something Jake didn't recognize, all wearing the formal robes of their positions. The Crothian spoke first, his voice deep and commanding. "Jake Mitchell, human trader, registered vessel wanderer. You have been summoned regarding your violations of council commercial law." Jake stood with his hands clasped behind his back, relaxed but respectful. "I wasn't aware I'd violated any laws. You have employed a member of a blacklisted species. You have provided material support to said species. You have openly defied council economic sanctions." With respect, Jake said calmly, "I've done none of those things." The Zenthri's antennae twitched with irritation. "We have multiple witnesses. We have documentation. You do not deny these actions." "I don't deny the actions. I deny that they are violations." Jake pulled out his own datapad. He'd spent the last 3 nights researching galactic law, reading through treaties and agreements until his eyes burned. Humans never signed the Council's Blacklist Enforcement Treaty. We're not bound by it. My employment of Lyra falls under human labor law, which explicitly forbids discrimination based on species, homeworld, or political status. The three council members exchanged glances. The Crothian leaned forward. You argue technicalities. I argue law, Jake corrected. Same thing you're doing, just from a different angle. Human, the third council member spoke for the first time, its voice like grinding metal. You do not seem to understand the position you are in. We can make trade very difficult for your species. Sanctions, restricted routes, elevated tariffs. Jake had expected this. It was the council's favorite threat. Economic pressure. Make it hurt where it counted, in the wallet. Most species fell in line quickly when credits were on the line. He met the council member's eyes steadily. You can try. But human trade networks don't work like yours. We're independent operators, not centralized. You sanction one route, we'll find another. You raise tariffs, we'll adjust prices. And I promise you, word will spread about why you're doing it. How the council threatens humans for refusing to let people starve. You would risk your entire species trade access for one Velari go. The Crothian sounded genuinely baffled. Jake smiled, but there was no humor in it. You still don't get it. It's not about one go. It's about the principle. Humans don't abandon people just because it's convenient. We don't let people starve just because some council says they are blacklisted. That's not who we are. The chamber fell silent. The council members looked at each other, having a wordless conversation that Jake couldn't follow. Finally, the Crothian spoke. You will cease contact with the Velari, or face consequences. Jake shrugged. Do what you need to do. I'll keep doing what I need to do. He turned and walked out of the chambers, his heart pounding but his steps steady. He knew he just made powerful enemies. He knew there would be consequences. But as he headed back to his ship where Lyra was waiting, nervous and hopeful, Jake realized he didn't regret a single word. The days after Jake's council meeting were tense. He expected retaliation, some kind of immediate consequence. But nothing came. The council stayed silent, which somehow felt more ominous than any threat. What Jake didn't expect was the attention from other humans. The story had spread through human trade networks like wildfire. A human trader standing up to the council, refusing to abandon someone in need. It hit something deep in the human community scattered across the galaxy. Within 3 days, 2 more human ships docked at Nexus Station. Not because anyone organized it. Not because of any official human government response. Just individual humans hearing the story and deciding to see what was happening. Then 4 more ships arrived. Then 7. A human medical technician named Beth Rodriguez set up a small clinic in the lower market and started treating Velari refugees for free. She didn't ask Jake's permission or coordination. She just did it. 2 human cargo haulers, the Reynolds brothers, started accepting Velari currency for goods when other vendors wouldn't. They took losses on the exchanges, but they didn't seem to care. The council watched all of this happening and couldn't understand it. It made no economic sense. Humans were risking profits, risking council sanctions, risking their trade relationships, all for aliens they'd never met. Aliens who couldn't even pay them back. Jake was in the market picking up supplies when he felt someone watching him. He turned to see a council representative standing a few meters away. Not one of the 3 from the chambers, but someone new. A Zenthari with deep blue coloring and antennae that twitched with what Jake had learned to recognize as confusion. The representative approached slowly, cautiously, like approaching something unpredictable. Human Jake Mitchell. That's me. Jake kept loading supplies into his cart. I must speak with you. So speak. I'm not stopping you. The Zenthari moved closer, lowering its voice. I have been sent to understand. The council needs to understand. Your behavior, the behavior of your species, it makes no sense. Jake looked up from his cart. What doesn't make sense about it? You risk profit for aliens you don't even know. You risk council sanctions. You risk your trade routes and your business relationships. For what? For Velari who cannot repay you. For people who mean nothing to your species. The representative's antennae were twitching faster now, agitated. Why? Jake stopped loading supplies. He stood up straight and looked at the Zenthari. Around them, the market continued its busy noise, but Jake felt like they were in a bubble of stillness. This was important. He could feel it. You really want to know? Jake asked quietly. Yes. The council has sent me specifically to understand. This is not mockery or interrogation. We genuinely do not understand. Jake was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. How could he explain something that felt so fundamental, so basic, that he'd never really had to put it into words before? Because we remember, Jake said finally. His voice was soft, but there was steel underneath it. Humans have been the outcast. We've been the ones starving while others walked by. We've been the ones laughed at while we died. The Zen-3's antennae stopped twitching. It was listening, really listening. Jake continued, the words coming easier now. You know how long humans have been in space? 40 years. 40 years since first contact. Before that, we were alone on our planet for thousands of years. And you know what we did to each other during all that time? We divided ourselves into groups. Different skin colors, different religions, different languages, different countries. And we used those divisions to justify terrible things. He paused, looking around the market at all the different species going about their business. We enslaved each other. We genocided each other. We let millions starve while others lived in luxury, and we told ourselves it was okay because they were different from us. Other. Not our problem. The Zen-3 was completely still now. We had famines where millions died while other countries had surplus food. We had refugees drowning in oceans while rich nations closed their borders. We had children starving in the streets of cities where other people threw away more food than those kids would see in a year. Jake's voice was getting rougher, emotion creeping in despite his efforts to stay calm. And the worst part? We got used to it. We normalized it. We walked past suffering every single day and told ourselves there was nothing we could do. But you changed, the Zen-3 said softly. We changed, Jake agreed. Not all at once. Not easily. It took centuries of fighting and suffering and slowly, painfully learning that those divisions we created were meaningless. That the things that made us different were superficial. That suffering is suffering, no matter who's experiencing it. He looked directly at the council representative. When humans finally made it to the stars, when we met you and all the other species out here, we made ourselves a promise. We'd seen what happens when you normalize cruelty, when you decide some people deserve to suffer because they are different or weak or inconvenient. We'd lived through that hell, and we swore never again. Not to us, and not to anyone else if we could stop it. The market noise seemed to rush back in as Jake finished speaking. The Zen-3 stood there, processing. Its antennae moved in complex patterns that Jake couldn't interpret. You do this because of your history, the representative said slowly. Because you know what it feels like. Exactly. Jake picked up his supply cart. Every human who's come to help Lyra and the other Velari, they're not doing it because they expect something in return. They're doing it because they can't walk past suffering anymore. We tried that for thousands of years, and it nearly destroyed us. We're not going back. The Zen-3 watched Jake walk away, and for the first time, it began to understand why the council's threats weren't working. You couldn't threaten someone into abandoning their core principles. And for humans, apparently, not abandoning people in need had become a core principle. The representative returned to the council chambers with its report, and the debate that followed would change the galaxy. 6 months changed everything. The Galactic Commerce Council, facing pressure from multiple fronts, quietly lifted the Velari blacklist. They called it an administrative review of outdated economic policies, which fooled absolutely no one. Everyone knew the truth. The council had backed down because humans refused to let people starve, and enough other species had started questioning whether the council's methods were worth following. Lyra barely recognized herself anymore. She stood in the lower market of Nexus Station, the same market where she'd collapsed against a wall waiting to die, but now everything was different. Her skin had returned to its natural iridescent shimmer, patterns of blue and purple that shifted as she moved. She'd gained back the weight she'd lost, her body healthy and strong again. She wore clean clothes, practical cargo pants and a jacket with the Wanderer ship insignia on the shoulder. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was the way she carried herself. Confident. Purposeful. Like someone who belonged here. She was in the middle of negotiating a major supply contract with a Hupari merchant, the same vendor whose food stall Jake had taken her to that first day. The merchant was trying to raise prices on medical supplies, citing shipping delays and increased demand. Those delays affect everyone equally, Lyra said calmly, pulling up shipping schedules on her datapad. And your competitor 2 stalls over is offering the same supplies at 15% less. So either match their price, or I walk. The Hupari clicked his tongue in annoyance but nodded. Fine. Matched price. But only because you drive hard bargain. Lyra smiled. That's why Jake hired me. She was finalizing the contract details when movement caught her eye. Something about the way the crowd was flowing, parting around an obstacle without really looking at it. That familiar pattern that made her stomach clench with old memories. She turned and saw a child sitting against the wall. Crothian, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with the grey skin and powerful build of his species. But he was small for a Crothian, thin in a way that wasn't natural. His clothes were dirty. His eyes were hollow. And the crowd walked past him without stopping. Without even looking. Just like they'd walked past her. Lyra felt like she'd been punched in the chest. For a moment she was back there, collapsed against that wall, watching hundreds of aliens pass by like she didn't exist. The memory was so vivid she could taste the hunger, feel the cold metal against her back, remember the desperate hope every time someone glanced her direction that maybe this time, maybe this person would help. The Hupari merchant was saying something about delivery schedules, but Lyra wasn't listening anymore. She saved the contract to her datapad and walked away mid-conversation, moving toward the child. As she got closer, she could see he'd been crying. Tear tracks on his gray cheeks. His hands were shaking slightly. She knew that shake. Hunger, exhaustion, fear all mixed together. Lyra knelt down beside him, moving slowly so she wouldn't startle him. Up close, he looked even younger. Just a kid. Just a scared, hungry kid that everyone had decided to ignore. "Hey," she said softly. The boy's head jerked up. His eyes went wide with fear. He pressed back against the wall like he expected her to hit him or yell at him to move along. Lyra understood that fear. She'd felt it too. The fear that comes from learning the hard way that most people are cruel, that kindness is rare, that asking for help usually makes things worse. "It's okay," Lyra said, keeping her voice gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Lyra. What's yours?" The boy didn't answer. He just stared at her with those frightened eyes. "Are you hungry?" Lyra asked. She already knew the answer, but she asked anyway. Gave him a chance to speak, to have some control over the situation. The boy nodded, just barely. Lyra remembered Jake kneeling beside her in this exact same market, offering his hand, saying those words that changed everything. "Nobody should starve. Not on my watch." She'd been terrified that it was a trick, that he wanted something from her, that there had to be a catch because kindness doesn't exist for free. But there hadn't been a catch. Jake had just been human. And humans, she'd learned, had this strange stubborn principle about not walking past suffering. She stood up and offered her hand to the boy. He looked at it like he couldn't quite process what was happening. "Come on," Lyra said, echoing Jake's words from 6 months ago. "Let me get you something to eat." The boy hesitated. She could see him trying to figure out her angle, trying to understand what she wanted from him. Why would a Velari help a Crothian? Their species had no connection. No alliance. The Crothians had been among the loudest supporters of the Velari blacklist. But Lyra just waited, patient, hand extended. She understood that he needed time to make the choice himself. That pushing wouldn't help. That trust couldn't be forced. Finally, slowly, the boy reached up and took her hand. His grip was weak, his hand cold. Lyra helped him to his feet, supporting him when his legs wobbled. "There's a food stall right over there," she said, pointing to the Hupari vendor she'd just been negotiating with. "Let's get you something warm to eat, okay? And then we can figure out what happened and how to help." Across the market, Jake was loading supplies onto a cargo cart when he saw them. Lyra and the Crothian child, walking slowly toward the food stall. He watched as Lyra sat the boy down, ordered food, and sat beside him while he ate with the desperate hunger of someone who hadn't eaten in days. Jake smiled. He didn't need to say anything. Didn't need to go over there or interfere. Lyra knew what to do. She'd learned it from him, but more than that, she'd lived it herself. She knew exactly what that boy needed because she'd needed the same thing not that long ago. Other vendors were watching too. Some looked surprised. A few looked thoughtful. And maybe, just maybe, a couple of them were reconsidering their own choices about who deserved help and who didn't. Humanity hadn't changed the galaxy with weapons or wealth or superior technology. They'd changed it by refusing to walk past someone who was starving. By insisting that suffering mattered, regardless of who was experiencing it. By remembering their own painful history and using it to ensure others didn't have to endure the same. And now that simple choice, that basic human principle, was spreading. One meal, one act of kindness, one person at a time.